So we're going to get started by looking at how we are going to do most of our code development in Haskell. And however you implement Haskell, you'll end up with a version of the Haskell interpreter which we can invoke by the command GHCi. It's the glorious Haskell compiler interpreter. And this will give you a read, evaluate, print loop in the style that you would have seen from many other languages like Python, for example. So we can, of course, type. That means we can type various expressions in this window, and that's great. But we're not actually going to do most of our development in this in the actual interpreter window. We'll try things out and we'll run code, but we won't actually do our development here. What we will do is we'll develop code by creating a file containing the code, and there's typically no specific IDE that we'll use for Haskell code. So I'm going to use the text editor that I've always used, and I've opened a window here. So this is an Emacs window, or Aquamax to be precise. This is an old school editor, and this will contain some Haskell code. So which editor you use here is really a matter of personal preference. It's nice to have an editor that knows about Haskell, because as this editor shows, it will highlight your syntax in helpful ways. And so I've started typing a bit of code here in this file, and a little bit of a plan for today. So my Haskell file optionally begins with a module name. If I were to use this piece of Haskell code in some other file, I could import it under this name. And you see here a bunch of comments. There's a block of comments and a single line comment. So this should be fairly obvious, and here I've actually made some notes about quick plan. Now, Haskell modules, Haskell files contain typically a bunch of definitions. And so here's an example of a definition: how many crowns you get per Brexit, the exchange rate. The definitions all start on to the far left in this file, and every definition of a constant or a function starts with a lowercase letter. So no surprises here, I guess, except perhaps the syntax for defining functions. Here are a couple of functions for converting from Swedish crowns to euros and back again. Okay, so when we've got a file containing some Haskell code, if we want to actually run that code or use that code, we need to load that file. So this particular file is called L01A, I think I've called it .hs. So I can load that file. And now you notice that the prompt for the interpreter has changed to the name of the file, and that star there indicates that whatever was there before is also included. And in particular, it includes something called the prelude, which is basically a standard set of definitions that you get by default when you start the Haskell interpreter and when you write some Haskell code. So we have all those those standard definitions from the module called the prelude, and now we also have the additional ones, which are the ones that I've just defined. So that means that I can use the definitions like exchange rate and the functions that I've defined. So if I want to convert to Swedish crowns something that cost me €8, I can see that that's going to cost me, to Swedish crowns something that cost me £8, then that'll be 99.08 Swedish crowns, and vice versa. Okay, so this is just a terminal. This could be whatever terminal you have on your particular machine, like whatever the terminal's called on Windows. PowerShell, that's the one I'm trying to look for. And you can invoke the interpreter from there. And the thing you have to remember is that when you make changes to your file over here, you need to save the changes and reload the file. So if I wanted to change this to 10, I'll comment out that 12 by adding a comment there. If I want to ask what the exchange rate is, I get the same value. So of course I've forgotten to do two things here. One is to actually save the file that I've edited, and the other is to reload it into GHC, and then you'll see that the change will take effect. Okay, so I'm going to work entirely within my editor, so I can load my Haskell interpreter within the editor, and that'll make life a little bit simpler for the purpose of presenting this material. Okay, so that was the basics of creating files and editing them. It's probably good to see what happens when you do something that doesn't make sense. I mean, I can write something syntactically incorrect, and when I try to compile it, I'll compile it using a command within my editor. You'll see that I'll get a bunch of error messages, parse error in this case, just a pure syntax error, indentation or mismatched brackets. And that's one kind of error that we will come across. Another kind of error might be an error in the types. So here I'm dealing with numbers and multiplying them together. If I take some operation that's incompatible with that, for example, appending a string, this is not JavaScript, so it's not going to make some sense of that. It's going to say that this is nonsense. And you'll see that I will get a bunch of error messages. Let me just resize that window so you can see them a bit better. The error messages will be a bit complicated until we understand a bit more about the type system.